Hey everybody, welcome back to Sweatpants BI. It's me, Sean here, and this week on the channel I'm going to do another data visual tutorial, this time focused on the Waffle chart. Now, if you've never really used a Waffle chart in the past, really it's not too dissimilar from other data visuals in Power BI that help us visualize proportions or percentages out of 100%. Things like pie charts, tree maps, donut charts, even stacked 100%, bar charts, horizontal or vertical. But a waffle chart really takes, the concept of a waffle and creates kind of a grid of squares, usually the same number of items, on the x-axis and the y-axis, and just provides you with another sort of visual that helps visualize the percentage of a whole that maybe a measure that you're working with in Power BI sort of takes out of 100%. So if you have a situation where you're trying to visualize that a percentage is really small, like maybe you've only hit like 4 or 5% of your sales goal, you could use a waffle chart where you have kind of a 10 by 10 grid, and you could visualize in color the 4% of sales or the 4% of your target that you've hit, and it's going to be this really small block, about 1 by 4 block, indicating that 4% of the 100% of your sales goal that you've reached. And then over time, you would start to see that grid sort of fill up square by square every time you pass another percentage threshold. But Power BI, of course, does not have a native waffle chart visual. So if you found yourself in a situation where you needed to create a waffle chart, most people are going to tell you that you need to download one from the visual marketplace or even build a custom visual. I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily the case. I actually find it pretty easy to create my own waffle chart in Power BI just by hacking the built-in scatterplot chart to serve my purposes. And because I love to show people, pretty cool tips and tricks that you can do in Power BI that are creative, I thought that this might be another good video where I could show you how to take a visual that already exists among your native data visualizations in Power BI and teach you how to manipulate that to create a waffle chart. So let's show you how it's done, and let's go ahead and hop into Power BI. So over here in Power BI, I have barely anything in this report, no real data whatsoever. All I have currently is just a random measure that I made up with just a hard-coded percentage value. In your Power BI reports, hopefully these values are not going to be hard-coded. They're going to be derived from your data, but you'll have some percentage that you've calculated, using some sort of DAX formula. But just to sort of cut corners here, keep things very simple, I just created a totally random measure with just a hard-coded 53% value here that you can see I visualized. And then I've got a couple of colors just so I know which colors I'm going to work with when I actually get to the point of building my waffle chart. So I've just got a couple of hex colors in here that I just went ahead and set up for my waffle chart. So nothing really going on in this report except for one fake measure. And that's why in order to build out our waffle chart, we're actually going to have to start over here in Excel. And so the way that this is going to work is because we're going to be sort of gaming a scatter chart and hacking this to turn it into a waffle chart, what we're going to need to do first is set up values for our x-axis and our y-axis in order to create the grid that is sort of the classic appearance of a waffle chart, because it's called a waffle chart because it has that kind of table-looking grid. So we're going to have to build this using a scatter chart, but we're going to need to plot the values that make up our waffle grid over here in Excel first. So our first column that we're going to create, we're just going to call that X because it's going to be our X-axis values. Then we're going to create a column called Y to serve as our Y-axis values. And then the other column, it doesn't really matter what you call it. If you want to call it Z, doesn't matter. I'm going to actually call mine value just to kind of set it apart. And then for the value column, we're going to build this out first. And what I do is just, kind of type in 1, 2, 3 into some cells. Then we're going to click on the little green dot here in the bottom, and we're just going to drag this bad boy down. And I way overshot it. And we're going to drag that down until we've got 100 because we're going to need to plot 100 coordinates. And the reason that that's 100 is because waffle charts typically visualize items out of 100%. So we need 100 values to plot because we're going to be making a 10 by 10 grid in our scatter chart. So let's first start with our x-axis values. And it's going to look something like this. We're going to have 10 points on our x-axis, and those are going to be plotted 10 times for each of 10 y-axis values. That's how you get the 100. 10 times 10 equals 100. So the first thing that we're going to do with our x-axis values is, so that we don't have to be too redundant here, let's just go ahead and copy and paste. And we're just going to go all the way down here. Whoops. Clicked out of Excel. Let's go ahead and keep clicking all the way down until we have reached the end of our table at 100. There we go. And then we're just going to quickly kind of fill in our y-axis values. And of course, every value in our x-axis needs to have a corresponding value in the y-axis so that we can plot 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, all the way down. Super, super simple. Once you get to 1, just swap over to the next number. And honestly, this is the hardest part of setting up our waffle chart, but the good thing is that if you see yourself creating more waffle charts in the future, I highly recommend that you just, once we are done with that, I highly recommend that you just save this table. That way you can keep using it for all of your future waffle chart needs. And once we've got that table, let's just go ahead and hop back over to Power BI. We're going to create a manual table here. We're going to copy and paste that in. There should be 100 rows of data. There is. If you want to give this table some name like z underscore scatter or z underscore waffle, that'll work just fine. Usually when I give tables a name of z underscore, it just kind of tells me, the developer, or reminds me that those tables aren't real data. They're not actually hooked up to anything. They're just hard-coded manual dummy tables or something like that. So once we've got our table there, you can go over and just check it out one more time. There's our x-axis and our y-axis values. Those are going to correspond to the values that we're going to set up with our scatter plot. So let's go ahead and grab our x, grab our y, and right now you can see I've just got one little dot here. That's not going to cut it. The scatter chart by default is going to try to sum up our x's and our y's. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, so let's just hit Don't Summarize by clicking on the caret. Clicking on Don't Summarize, there's our 10 x-axis values, which is what we want, but we also need to see 10 corresponding y-axis values for each dot here. So let's change our sum of y to also Don't Summarize. And already you're starting to see the bones of our waffle chart, right? So let's go ahead next and just grab our value column up here. I'm going to scroll down to the tooltips section because I want you to see sort of what is happening behind the scenes here. It says sum of value. That doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter that this is aggregating because each of these dots only has one corresponding value for the value column. So, you know, if we hover on this first dot, you're going to see 1 for sum of value. If you hover on the next one, you'll see 2 for sum of value. If you go up, you'll see like 42, 43, 44. The reason that you want to confirm that all of these values are showing up correctly for everything in the waffle chart is that these values are what we're going to map our colors to when we're actually creating our waffle chart effect. So next things, let's just go ahead and quickly update our x-axis because you'll notice that by default, our x-axis and our y-axis start at 1 because that's where our data starts. And that means that our values on the edges get kind of cut in half. Like you'll see that going up this line here, the circles that make up the waffle chart are kind of cut in half. The ones at the top are kind of cut in half. So let's give ourselves a little bit of breathing room between our between the edges of our chart. We're going to need to do the same thing for our x-axis and our y-axis. And now you'll see that none of the dots are cut off. The next thing I'm going to do is let's quickly just go ahead and turn off our labels. Waffle charts tend to be pretty lean charts by design. We're really just focused on sort of the grid components. We're not really focused on the numbers that describe our x-axis and our y-axis. We're just trying to visualize 53% visually, which means that we want, about half of this grid to be one color and the other half to be another color. So next thing that we're going to do is let's make this look a little bit more waffle charty by going over here to our markers. And you could use circles, but I'm going to use squares just to make this more of a traditional sort of waffle chart. And then, you can just sort of make these things larger until you're pretty happy with the overall appearance of them. Go big or go home. Going to go ahead and kind of shrink this down a little bit. The more I can make this sort of square shaped, the better the overall waffle impression is going to be. So now let's go ahead and just kind of pull this up here next to our measure, or if you want to grab everything and kind of center it, that works just fine. Now we're going to focus ourselves on creating the actual colors here for our values. So notice that if I open up my color options, I do have the ability to apply conditional formatting to this grid. So what I want to do is I want to figure out a way to visualize all of the cubes in this waffle chart that would correspond to being less than 53%. So I'm going to create a new measure here, and I'm going to call this waffle chart color. And here I'm going to say if the selected value, and I'm going to grab my value from my whatever value is being evaluated in my waffle chart, which could be 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 100. But if that selected value is less than or equal to, and here is where I'm going to reference my measure that I created, and I'm going to need to multiply it times 100, right? Because these are percentages, so this is technically 0.53, and all of my values that are mapped in my waffle chart are whole numbers. I'm going to need to multiply my percentage times 100 so that 53% becomes 53, the number. And hopefully now you're kind of catching where this is going. If any value here is less than 53, or less than or equal to 53, I'm going to have it be one color and everything else be a different color. So if it is less than 53, I want to use my big, bold, sort of bright magenta color here that you can see over here. And if it isn't larger than my threshold, then I just want that to be gray. So let's use our E6, E6, E6 color. Next, let's go ahead and head back over to our chart. Let's open up our markers. Let's hit color and add our conditional formatting. This evaluates to a field value because we're using a measure that we created to map those colors. Let's hit OK. And there is our scatter chart. And what I like about doing this is, once again, it gives us a little bit more flexibility with our waffle chart. If you want to use squares, great. If you want to use circles, no problem. You have all of the customization functionality that's built into the scatter chart. A lot of these I think kind of look weird. I definitely am not a huge fan of the triangles. Although if I can possibly name this, I think this looks like a bunch of trees. So remember, Sean Chandler coined the phrase forest chart. So we're inventing new visuals here. I'm going to call this a forest chart, even though I do prefer the typical waffle chart. But just letting you know that, that again, just because Power BI doesn't have a native waffle chart doesn't mean that it doesn't kind of. If you're somebody that needs a waffle chart and you're accustomed to like downloading third-party visuals from the marketplace, just wanted to sort of create another tutorial that just shows you how so many of the charts that are already included in Power BI's native visuals can easily just be sort of reconfigured to build some other really, really cool charts, because so many different data visualizations out there share a lot of the same components, like, plotting one thing on the x-axis, plotting something else on the y-axis, and then highlighting or spotlighting numbers that are below or above a certain threshold. So, pretty easy to just take the scatter chart, which has the ability to, replace all of the markers on the chart with other shapes, and just leverage that and just fundamental understandings of how chart design work to create a very, very serviceable, I think, waffle chart without having to do anything fancy other than just get a little bit creative in Excel with mapping your X and Y axis coordinate values. But yeah, now, if you come in and let's say you have a dynamic measure that your users are going to be, slicing and dicing, and let's say that your percentage changes and it's not always 0.53%. Once you've got everything set up, as your users slice and dice and potentially, change the output of this measure, the good thing about setting it up this way is that your waffle chart will just automatically update based on their selections, and you might have to, I will say one thing that you'll probably have to do for the user experience with this is your users are going to see in the default tooltip settings when they hover that X and Y axis coordinate in your value. So, if you really want to help them, you might have to create like a custom tooltip or something that's a little bit less confusing. But I think that the overall presentation of the waffle chart using this method is still very, very effective, and you're able to get exactly what you want. You can kind of retool this chart as needed. You'll notice that I'm even able to sort of create like a bar chart, but so you'll have to make sure that you're using a pretty clear square grid for your waffle chart, because this doesn't respond as well to like being stretched out or collapsed. But, still, I think overall it's a very, very effective way of sort of hacking and creating a waffle chart. So on the whole, it takes just a few minutes to set up a waffle chart visual in Power BI. Again, the hardest thing is setting up that Excel table that's 100 rows that you can use to create sort of the background foundation for your waffle chart. But once you have that, you can just import it or keep it in a Power BI template so that it's there in case you need it for all of your waffle chart means. Once you have that, actually plotting out the elements in your scatter plot to create that chart, super, super easy. And then mapping your percentage values to the colors and the individual cubes in your waffle chart, also not too bad. One DAX measure is fundamentally all that you need, and then you're good to go. So hope you found that waffle chart hack useful. I don't build a whole lot of waffle charts, honestly, in my day-to-day, but I have needed to create some in the past, and I find that to be a pretty useful hack. Hopefully you'll find it useful too if you need a waffle chart in your Power BI reports and don't feel like downloading a third-party visual, or if you just want to make sure that you have more customization options that kind of align to the native data visuals in Power BI. If you enjoyed that hack, or if you have any other really cool tricks that you've used to turn some of Power BI's native visuals into entirely different visuals, I would love to hear about them. Maybe I'll steal your idea and use it on the channel, who's to say. But as always, if you've enjoyed this video and Sweatpants BI in general, feel free to like or subscribe to the channel. I always definitely appreciate it. And yeah, outside of that, hope you have a great rest of your work week. I've been Sean, this is Sweatpants BI. Thanks so much for checking out the channel, everybody.